is a presentation that I did at the Conference for Adolescent Success in Arlington, Texas. It's going to tell you about using vocabulary, particularly academic vocabulary, in your classroom. The first thing I guess we need to address is, what is academic vocabulary? You can read a definition that Townsend gave in 2009. Academic vocabulary refers to the words that are used in academic discourse, both written and spoken, that traditionally have been identified from academic texts. There are lists of academic vocabulary, and these lists will indicate how often a word is used or how often it occurs in academic tests. Of course, you can use academic vocabulary from whatever content and whatever text that you're using in your classroom. It's important in our classroom to give explicit instruction to academic vocabulary because it helps students comprehend whatever content you're trying to teach them. Notice the second quote, that teaching specific terms or academic vocabulary is in a specific way is the strongest action a teacher can take to ensure that the students have the academic background knowledge they need to understand the content that they will encounter in school. As teachers, we can't afford not to do direct instruction of academic vocabulary. When we're looking at academic vocabulary, there are several levels. The first level is the unknown word, a word a child has never seen or heard before. The second level is a word that they begin to recognize when they see it, but they're still not very sure about what it means. Partial word knowledge, they sort of are beginning to get a grasp of what it means, but they don't have a full understanding. And of course, level 4 would be full word knowledge, which is the goal that we want for all of our students with each of the academic vocabulary words that we present in class. Tier 2 words are a little more difficult for students. They are not the basic way to express a concept. They're general words that can apply across multiple domains and in multiple content areas. They oftentimes provide specific information that's needed to be successful in your content area. And they are often words that are more frequently found in written context rather than oral context. And then Tier 3 words are really rare words that only apply to specific domains. And the goal is to recognize the particular instances when that word needs to be used in order to be successful with your content. So basically, we're talking about 3 tiers of words. Basic words, words that we need to know in our everyday conversation. Academic vocabulary, words that we need to know to understand academic vocabulary in a variety of content areas. And then specialized terms that are unique to your content area. Some examples of Tier 1 words would be guitar, harmonica, worries, nightmare, unfair, celebrate. These are just common words that you might hear in everyday conversation. Some Tier 3 words would be like drought, dust bowl, stock market, the Great Depression, unsanitary. These are words, specialized terms that you might find in a social studies lesson. And then Tier 2 vocabulary words are words like ordinary, spirit, desperate, original, sorrow, tragedy. They're more common words than the specialized terms, but they're more specific than just those basic words that we encounter in everyday conversation. Let's practice and see if you can identify Tier 2 words. Read the following excerpt from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Now, just make on a piece of scratch paper, make a list of which words you consider to be Tier 2 words from that passage. Think you have them? Let's look at the next slide. He dashed back across the road. Dashed is a word. Disturb is a word. Seized is a word. Stroked is a word. And unusual. Those are the words that would be considered academic vocabulary in that passage. Vocabulary words. And the two websites listed on your screen would lead you to some of those more popular academic vocabulary lists. Vocabulary is especially important with ELLs and low SES students. And SES, just to clarify terminology, SES is social economic status. So students with low SES would be poverty level students. ELLs are English language learners, students whose native language is not English. Read the statistics on this slide and you'll see the importance of teaching vocabulary for ELL and low SES students. So how do we go about teaching academic vocabulary? Well, one way that we do it is to categorize unfamiliar words into the 3 tiers. Decide the level Tier 1 words do not need to be taught explicitly. Tier 2 words do need to be taught explicitly, and students need lots of exposure and practice using those words. And Tier 3 words need to be taught for the unit that you're teaching at that particular time. You should use explicit instruction and a variety of word study activities to teach your Tier 2 words. And we're going to give you some examples of how to do that in this slideshow. It's important that you support students' development of word learning strategies. Provide them lots of strategies that they can use so that when they encounter a word that they don't understand, they know how to go about finding out what it means. A lot of times, students who are struggling readers will read until they come to a word they don't know, and then they just quit reading. And our goal is to teach them some strategies so that they know what to do when that happens, and they don't quit reading, they keep going. Finally, you need to provide daily opportunities for students to read books and to listen to books being read aloud. All right, let's look at some steps that we can use to explicitly build academic vocabulary. One thing that you can do is to present the term in student-friendly language. This is where using a dictionary definition doesn't work. I can think of lots of instances where students have looked up a definition of a word in their glossary or dictionary, written down the definition, and they still don't have a clue what the word means because the terms being used in that glossary or dictionary aren't student-friendly. The best story I have is a student who was looking up the word frugal in the glossary of their book. And the definition that they wrote down was to save. A person who's frugal is a person who saves. Makes perfect sense. Then they were asked to use that word in a sentence, and their sentence was, frugal me, I'm drowning, I'm drowning. Now, although that may seem funny to us, it really makes a lot of sense, because what they were saying was, save me, I'm drowning. Makes sense with what they wrote down, but that's not what the word frugal means. That happens a lot in classrooms, and so we want to take specific action so it doesn't happen with our students as well. The second step is have students restate the term in their own words. A really good way to do this is simply have them at their tables turn to a neighbor or turn to the other members of the table and have them teach that word to their fellow students. Then they're putting the words into their own, the definitions into their own words, and students a lot of times will listen to their peers explain a word and comprehend it much better than if we try to explain it as teachers. You know how we adults are. They don't like to listen to what we have to say. And then step 3 is have the students represent the term in graphic form. Have them draw a picture of the word. It doesn't have to be the greatest work of art, simply a visual picture of that word so that they connect that word into their mind. I used to use this activity a lot in my classroom, and I had one picture that really stood out in my mind, and it was the word parasitic. And the picture, I still can see it today, that the student drew was of a fist with a big tick on top of it. That's how he remembered what parasitic meant. And it worked for not only for him, but it worked for me, because anytime I see that word, I think of that picture. The fourth step is have students use the term not only in the context that you're teaching them, but in other contexts as well. So the more that they use the word, the more it's going to become part of their own vocabulary. And then step 5, have them discuss the term with peers. We've talked about cooperative learning and how important that is for adolescents. So take advantage of that collaborative nature of middle-level students so that they use it to share the words that they are learning in class. Step 6, try using lots of vocabulary games. This gives students more exposure to the term, and it's fun and they enjoy it. Okay, I closed it. Another step is to nurture word consciousness. And when you do this, there's several different ways that you can do it. But one of the best ways that you can do it is through the use of word walls. And in a moment, you're going to see some photographs of different types of word walls. And word walls are great ways to make kids aware of the words that you want them to be learning. And it's a great reminder, and there's lots of activities that you can do with word walls to keep reviewing and repeating those words over again. And I'll talk about some of those as we look at the examples. Wordo is another, is like a bingo game that you can play with your students, and you can use the words on the word wall to play the game, and that's a fun way for kids to practice their vocabulary work. This first word wall is a math wall, and what I liked about it is that they divided their wall into 3 sections. The first section is current words. And so if you look at there, you'll see that there's 5 vocabulary words that they're working on in this math class right now. And then each week, when they have new words that come up, they take their current words and move them to the review section. And then they can revisit those and spiral the review of those vocabulary words throughout the rest of the year. And then the last section is called wow words, and although it's empty at this point in time, the thing for wow words is to have kids be looking for words, math words that they don't know the meaning of, and they can bring them to the teacher for extra points or whatever you want to do, and their words go up in the wow section, and you can talk about what they mean. So the idea here is to review your to introduce your current words, to review the words that you've already covered in class, and to get kids out there looking for math words that they don't know the meaning of. This word wall I thought was really interesting. This is in a language arts class, and what they've done, and the labels are a little hard to see, is they have divided the words up according to the parts of speech. And this section is adverbs, and notice they've done these words tell how, these words tell when, these words tell where, and how often, and how much. So as they're looking at vocabulary words, they're sorting them according to parts of speech, and even within the parts of speech into specific ways that those adverbs can be used. This is really good to help kids that struggle with language with their writing, because when they're lost for a word to use, they've got that word wall to refer back to, and it can be very beneficial. This science board is very simple, and I like it because of the simplicity and the ease of using it. And what this teacher has done is she's simply taken some science vocabulary, printed them out on her computer on a sheet of colored paper, slid them into a protector, and she keeps a notebook for each unit that she does, and when she's through using these, she can just slide them right back into her notebook and have them for next year. She's got the words on one color, the definitions on another, and using magnets to put them on her whiteboard, and kids will match the word and the vocabulary word and its definition to each other. This is a different math board, word wall, and this one is just emphasizing math verbs. And so they've taken all the verbs that they find in math problems, and they put them up on the board, and they talk about what those words mean and how to use them to solve math problems. This vocabulary word wall is from social studies, and there's nothing really unique about it. It was attractive, and I was having a hard time finding a word wall in social studies class, but as you can see here, it can be used all across the curriculum. This is another math board, and what this teacher did was she used the alphabet all the way across her room, and then she would put the words up under the letter that the word began with. But what I really like about this particular word wall is the fact that they've got something to illustrate each word. For example, on range, they've got maximum minus minimum equals the range. For radius, they've got a picture of a circle with a radius drawn in. So that's a very good way to reinforce the words, because not only do you have the word, but you have the pictorial representation to go along with it. We mentioned that one of the things that we should do when we're teaching Tier 2 words is use explicit instruction in a lot of different word study activities. So one activity that I like to use is an activity called Soma Vocabulary. And with this one, you give students a word, and they have to define it and come up with an action to illustrate it. And then you put the class in groups, and you get the whole class in a circle, and each person or each group goes over their word. They tell the word, they tell what it means, and do the action. And then the next person, the whole class does it with them. They repeat it. And then the next person tells us their word. They go through the definition. They show us the action. We repeat it. And then we go back to the first person and do theirs again. and so forth. And so it takes about 15 or 20 minutes to do this activity with 10 words, but when you get through, they've repeated those words and definitions so many times, they remember them, and it's tactile, kinesthetic, auditory, and visual, and it takes all those senses and combines them to help the students learn the vocabulary words. Vocabulary cards are another way that you can work on new vocabulary, and there's thousands of games that you can play with your vocabulary once you get the words on cards. Many of our students keep personal vocabulary journals where they keep their own words and illustrate them, and that's another great activity for kids, and I always have them illustrate the word as well as define it when I do a personal vocabulary journal. For my ESL students, I have them do it in both English and Spanish, or English and their native language, and that's a good reinforcement for them as well. Word posters is one of my favorite ways to teach vocabulary. When I taught language arts, I would have my students, always would have lots of words to go with a novel, and so I'd give each student in the class one word, and they were to become the expert on that word. And when they became the expert on that word, they would make a poster that had their word and a picture to illustrate it and perhaps the definition. Usually it's just the word and the picture. And then when we would come across that word in the novel, we would call on the expert, and they would once again remind us of what the word means, use it in a sentence, whatever, and they became the expert to teach that word to the class. It works really well. One time I was using that activity, and we came to a word, and I said, "Who's the expert on this word?" And nobody said anything for a minute, and then one of my students said, "Oh, that's so-and-so's word. They're absent today, but there's their poster, and here's what it meant." So they not only associated the word and the picture, but they associated it with the child that was the expert on that word, and I thought that was really a neat insight. Word maps are another great way. Most of you are familiar with the idea of word maps, where you take a word and you draw a map of synonyms, antonyms, and so forth off of that word. And then word sorts, where you take your vocabulary words and you sort them into categories. I'm going to show you an activity in just a minute that's called Vocabulary Rock and Roll, and it's done using dice, and you roll the dice, and then your card will tell you what to do with the word. This is an example of a Frayer map that was done in science, and you learned about Frayer maps in the last module as we talked about, or no you didn't, I'm sorry. Frayer maps are, you're going to see a video on how to make a Frayer map that Mrs. Kahn did with her class, but it's a really good way to put students in groups, give them one very important word that you need them to learn, and have them define it, give examples and non-examples. And then for that fourth area up there, you can do several things. You can do characteristics. I use synonyms sometimes in language arts class. You can have them illustrate the word, and whatever suits your situation the most. But Frayer maps are very effective because it gets students talking and doing deep thinking about what the word really means. Here's Vocabulary Rock and Roll that I was talking about before. So they have a card that looks like this, and a die. They roll the die, and if they get a 1, they have to define the word. If they get a 4, they have to draw it, and so forth. It becomes a game. This is a foldable for a vocabulary where the student is given one word, and then they make a foldable. They put the definition, the part of speech, the synonym, the antonym, use it in a sentence, and illustrate it. And they do that under the flaps that they've got there. That's fun to do. It's also very important for us to support students' development of word learning strategies. And one way that we do that is by explicit instruction. We teach kids how to learn new words. And there's lots of different strategies out there. I think you should use multiple strategies, because if one strategy doesn't work for a child, maybe the next one will. And they will self-eliminate. They'll choose the ones that work for them, and they'll forget about the ones that don't. Another thing that I really like are anchor charts. And these are simply charts you put up on the wall that go through the steps that you've taught in explicit instruction. For example, your anchor chart might say, reread the sentence containing the word, look for context clues, analyze the word parts, look for root words and affixes to help you figure out the meaning. And if you're not successful, you go to step 4, pronounce the word to see if it sounds familiar. And then if that doesn't work, check the word in the dictionary or ask the teacher for help. So what you're doing here is you're putting that poster up on the wall, and when a child says, I don't know what this word means, I said, have you looked at the anchor chart? Go through your steps, and if you get to step 5, let me know and I'll help you. It's just a visual reminder for kids who struggle. What should I do when I come across a word that I don't know the meaning of? We also need to provide daily opportunities for students to read books and for them to listen to books being read aloud. And when you do this, you need to provide books at a variety of reading levels. You have students in your class that read from first grade to high school level. And so you're going to need books at all of those levels, because when students are reading independently, it needs to be something that's easy for them to read, that they're comfortable with the reading level. You need to have both fiction and nonfiction books available for them. In early grades, we have a tendency to lean heavily on fiction, and students, as they get in grades 4 through 6, they're learning to, they're reading to learn, and they're using more nonfiction, and kids really struggle with nonfiction sometimes. So we need to have both available for kids to read. We need to provide authentic opportunities to read. There needs to be a purpose. Why are you reading this? What are you trying to find out? What information are you looking for? We need to talk with our students about what's being read. When you're reading aloud to your students, you're able to use metacognition and model for them the strategies that you use when you come across a word that you might not know the meaning of, or a word that they might not know the meaning of. Model for them, walk them through the steps, and help them learn to make those steps in working with unfamiliar vocabulary automatic, and then they won't need the anchor chart anymore. Talk about what's being read before you read. You need to do some type of introduction to activate prior knowledge and help kids activate their schema about what they already know about the topic you're going to read about. As you're reading, modeling for them the vocabulary and comprehension skills that they need to understand what's being read. And then after reading, talk about what was important. What did you learn from this? Great things to help you.